Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Three in the morning. It's always 3 in the morning when I wake up hearing those sounds again. My new house is over 1,000 miles from Olympic National Park, but I still hear them. My wife says they're just nightmares. She wasn't there. She didn't see what I saw that October night. My name is Thane Blackwood, and I need to tell someone this story. It's been 6 years since I left my job as a forest ranger and moved from Washington to New Mexico. Here in Albuquerque, the desert is dry, open, honest. You can see for miles in every direction. There are no towering Douglas firs creating cathedral shadows, no moss hanging like burial shrouds from ancient branches, no sound-deadening carpet of decomposing leaves that can hide footsteps or screams. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, back when I thought I understood what danger looked like in the wilderness. I was 29 then, had been working as a ranger at Olympic National Park for 3 years. Not a veteran by any means, but I wasn't green either. I knew the Hoh River Trail system like the back of my hand, could navigate the temperate rainforest in conditions that would leave most people hopelessly lost. The Olympic Peninsula was my domain. All that primordial wilderness stretching from the Pacific coast to the glacier-capped peaks, where some of the last old-growth forests in America still stood like ancient sentinels. October 15th, 2019. That's the date burned into my memory. The autumn rains had started early that year, turning the forest floor into a spongy maze of fallen cedar and hemlock logs. The salmon runs were in full swing, drawing researchers and wildlife enthusiasts deep into areas where cell service was a fantasy, and the nearest road might as well have been on another planet. Iris Caldwell had been missing for 36 hours. She was a graduate student from the University of Washington, 23 years old, working on her thesis about salmon spawning patterns in the park's river systems. Smart kid, according to her advisor. Methodical, cautious. The type who filed detailed itineraries and carried backup equipment for her backup equipment. The type who didn't just vanish, but she had. Her research station on the Solduke River had been found abandoned. Tent still standing, sleeping bag laid out, equipment scattered but not ransacked. Her waterproof research notebooks were stacked neatly on a camp table, filled with meticulous observations about water temperature and fish behavior, the last entry dated October 13th at 4:47 p.m., 2 days of silence after that. I remember standing at her campsite that first morning, October 16th, breathing in the thick, loamy smell of wet forest and trying to read the story the scene was telling me. My supervisor, Chief Ranger Patricia Voss, had assigned me as the primary on this one. It should have been routine. Most missing persons in the park were day hikers who'd taken a wrong turn or gotten caught in weather. We'd find them cold, scared, maybe dehydrated, but alive. This felt different from the start. Radio check, Blackwood. Patricia's voice crackled through my handheld. What's your assessment? I keyed the mic, studying the campsite again. Site's too clean, Chief. If she'd left in a panic, bear, weather, injury, there'd be signs. This looks organized. Organized how? I couldn't articulate it then, that prickle along my spine, the way the forest seemed to be holding its breath around Iris's abandoned camp. Like she was expecting to come back. Coffee mugs still on the table, half full, fires been properly banked, not just abandoned, and her bear canisters still sealed. She wouldn't have left food accessible if she was planning to be gone overnight. Could be she went for a day hike and got turned around. Weather's been shifting fast up there. Negative. All her day hiking gear's still here. Compass, first aid kit, emergency beacon. It's all accounted for. There was a pause. Through my earpiece, I could hear the ambient noise of the ranger station, phones ringing, the weather radio chattering about an incoming storm system. Normal sounds of a normal day. But standing there in that cathedral of moss and shadow, normal felt like a foreign concept. Search and rescue protocols, Blackwood. Start with a half-mile radius from base camp spiral pattern. I'm sending Martinez up to assist, ETA 2 hours. Copy that, Chief. I clipped the radio to my belt and began my search, following protocol to the letter. In training, they teach you that most lost persons are found within the first search radius. People don't travel as far as they think when they're panicked or disoriented. They tend to follow water, seek shelter, make decisions based on the path of least resistance. Iris Caldwell, I was about to learn, hadn't followed any of those rules. The first hour of searching revealed nothing. No footprints in the soft earth, unusual for someone who'd been living at the site for nearly a week. No broken branches, no fabric caught on thorns, no sign of passage through the dense undergrowth. It was as if she'd simply evaporated. By the second hour, I'd expanded my search radius and found the first anomaly. 50 yards downstream from her camp on the far bank of the Sol Duc, I discovered a single boot print in the mud. Size 7, women's hiking boot, consistent with what Iris had been wearing according to her gear list. But the print was facing downstream, away from her camp, and it was alone. No corresponding left foot impression, no trail leading to or from it. I photographed it, took measurements, tried to construct a scenario that would explain a single boot print in the middle of nowhere. Maybe she'd hopped from stone to stone crossing the river, only touched down once. But the nearest stones were 6 feet away, too far to jump, and the print was pressed deep into the mud. Someone moving fast with purpose, or someone who'd been carrying additional weight. That's when I noticed the smell. In the desert where I live now, scents dissipate quickly in the dry air, but the Olympic rainforest holds odors like a sponge. The perpetual dampness traps everything from the sweet decomposition of fallen logs to the musky scent of elk. You learn to read those smells, to distinguish between the natural perfume of the forest and something else. This was else. Metallic, organic, wrong. I followed it upstream, away from Iris's camp, into a section of forest so thick with undergrowth that the canopy blocked out most of the October sky. The smell grew stronger, mixing with the sound of rushing water and something else, a rhythmic scraping like metal on stone. That's where I found the first cache. Hidden beneath an overhang of moss-covered granite, someone had carved out a shelter. Not a natural cave, but an excavated hollow, camouflaged so expertly that I nearly walked past it twice. Inside, arranged with military precision, were supplies that had no business being in a national park. MRE's water purification tablets, a tactical radio with an extended antenna, maps of the park's trail system marked with symbols I didn't recognize, and photographs. Jesus Christ, the photographs. They were surveillance shots, long-range telephoto lens work showing hikers, researchers, and park visitors who had no idea they were being watched. The images were organized chronologically, dating back months, maybe years. And in the most recent batch, I recognized a face. Iris Caldwell, photographed from a distance as she set up her research station, cataloged like prey. My hands were shaking as I radioed it in. Chief, I need backup, multiple units, and contact the FBI. Blackwood, slow down. What did you find? I tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled. Surveillance photos, hidden camps, evidence of long-term stalking. It sounded insane even to me, like something from a movie rather than a missing person case in a national park. I'm en route, Patricia said. Maintain your position and don't touch anything else. Martinez is 20 minutes out. 20 minutes. In the growing darkness of an October afternoon in the Olympic rainforest, 20 minutes felt like forever. That's when the radio static started. It began as background noise, the kind of interference you'd expect in heavy terrain with spotty coverage. But it was rhythmic, almost pulsed. And underneath it, I could swear I heard something else. A voice maybe, too distorted to make out words, but definitely human. Chief, are you copying this interference? No response. Chief, radio check. Static. I tried switching channels, adjusting the antenna, all the troubleshooting protocols we'd drilled. Nothing. My radio had become a box of expensive, useless electronics. The forest had gone quiet around me. Not the normal quiet of evening settling in, but an unnatural silence that made my skin crawl. No bird calls, No rustle of small animals in the underbrush. No sound except the distant murmur of the Solduc River and my own increasingly rapid breathing. That's when I realized I was being watched. You know that feeling, the primitive awareness that predator eyes are cataloging your movements, assessing your weaknesses. Every ranger develops it after enough time in the wilderness. Usually, it's a deer or elk, curious about human intrusion into their territory. Sometimes it's a bear or cougar, and you follow protocols to make yourself less interesting to them. This felt different. This felt intelligent, calculating. I'd been crouched in the hidden shelter for maybe 10 minutes, photographing evidence with my personal camera, when the feeling hit me like ice water in my veins. Slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements, I backed out of the shelter and scanned the surrounding forest. Nothing, just moss-draped trees and gathering shadows. But the feeling persisted, intensified. Someone was out there studying me with the same methodical attention those surveillance photos had captured. I was no longer the searcher. I was the searched. My training kicked in. Document your position, establish communication, request backup, maintain situational awareness. But my radio was dead. Backup was still 15 minutes away, and situational awareness was telling me to get the hell out of there. I started back toward Iris's campsite, following the trail I'd broken through the undergrowth. But something was wrong. Branches I'd pushed aside were back in position. Ferns I'd stepped on had been carefully arranged to hide my passage. Someone had been following behind me, erasing my trail. Professional, military-level fieldcraft. My pace quickened. The autumn light was fading fast, and in the Olympic rainforest, dark meant dark. The canopy was so thick that even with a full moon, navigation became a matter of feel more than sight. I needed to reach Iris's camp, establish a defensive position, and wait for Martinez. But the trail back wasn't where I'd left it. I stopped, checked my compass, tried to orient myself using the sound of the river. But the compass needle was spinning slowly, steadily, like it was being affected by some kind of electromagnetic field. And the river sound seemed to be coming from the wrong direction. Panic started creeping up my throat. This was my park, my territory. I'd hiked these trails hundreds of times. I didn't get lost, but someone was making sure I did. I pulled out my GPS unit, powered it on, waited for satellite acquisition. The screen glowed reassuringly in the growing darkness, showing my position as a blinking dot surrounded by detailed topographical data. According to the GPS, I was exactly where I thought I was, 50 yards from Iris's campsite. But when I looked up from the screen, there was no campsite, just more forest, stretching away in every direction. My GPS was lying to me. That's when I heard the first scream. It came from ahead and to my left, where Iris's camp should have been. A woman's voice, high and desperate, calling for help. My training warred with my instincts. The voice could be Iris, injured and terrified, or it could be a trap. But I was a ranger. My job was to help people, not second-guess distress calls. I moved toward the sound, pulling out my flashlight and thumbing it on. The LED beam cut through the darkness, illuminating moss and ferns and tree trunks that all looked identical. The screaming continued, always seeming to come from just ahead, just out of sight. "Iris, is that you? This is Park Ranger Blackwood." The screaming stopped. Complete silence again, so profound that my ears started ringing. I swept the flashlight beam in a wide arc, looking for any sign of movement, any reflection of eyes. Nothing. Then the voice came again, but closer. Much closer. "Help me. Please. I'm hurt." The voice was to my right now, maybe 20 feet away, hidden behind a fallen cedar log. I approached carefully, flashlight leading, my other hand on the radio that I knew was useless but somehow still represented connection to the civilized world. "Where are you? Keep talking so I can find you." "Here. I'm here. Please hurry." The voice was coming from behind the log, but as I got closer, something about it started bothering me. The cadence was wrong, too measured, like someone reading from a script. And there was no pain in it, despite claiming to be injured. I reached the log and shined my light over it. Nothing. Just forest floor covered in decades of fallen needles. But the voice spoke again, right next to my ear. "Right here, Ranger." I spun around, nearly dropping the flashlight, heart hammering against my ribs. A man stood 3 feet away, close enough that I should have heard him approach, should have sensed his presence. He was tall, lean, dressed in woodland camouflage that would have made him invisible until he chose to be seen. His face was painted with mud and charcoal in a pattern that broke up the human features, made him look like a shadow given form. But his eyes were visible, pale and cold, studying me with the detached interest of a scientist examining a specimen. "You found my cache," he said conversationally, like we were discussing the weather. His voice was calm, educated, with just a trace of a Pacific Northwest accent. "Took you longer than I expected. Your predecessor was quicker." My predecessor. The words hit me like a physical blow. What happened to Iris Caldwell? He smiled, and in the LED glare of my flashlight, his teeth looked sharp. "She's safe, for now." Same question I asked about David Kim last year, and Sarah Rodriguez the year before that. Always the same question from you Rangers. What happened? Where are they? Are they safe? Never the right question. What's the right question? What do I want? He stepped closer, moving with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in the wilderness darkness. "What's my end game? How long have I been doing this? But you Rangers, you're trained to think about rescue, not predation. Makes you predictable." I was reaching for my sidearm, a movement I tried to keep subtle, non-threatening. But he noticed. Of course he noticed. "I wouldn't," he said softly. "Not if you want to see Miss Caldwell again. She's quite brilliant, by the way. Her research on salmon behavioral patterns is fascinating. Did you know that when salmon sense a predator, they don't just flee? They alter their entire migration route, sometimes permanently. Change the pattern that's been successful for millions of years, all because of one threat." He was talking about the salmon, but his eyes never left mine. The implication was clear. "You're him," I said. "The disappearances over the past 3 years. David Kim, Sarah Rodriguez, the others. You've been hunting people." "Hunting implies random selection, Ranger. This is much more sophisticated. I prefer the term apex management. Every ecosystem has predators that keep populations in check, prevent overcrowding, eliminate the weak. I simply fill that role for a species that's forgotten it has natural enemies." My radio crackled suddenly, startling both of us. Through the static came Martinez's voice, distant but audible. "Blackwood, respond. I'm at the Caldwell campsite. Where are you?" The man who'd been stalking me tilted his head, listening. "Your backup. Right on schedule. Miguel Martinez, 28 years old, ranger for 2 years. Originally from Yakima. Married, 1 daughter, age 4. Lives at 1247 Cedar Lane in Port Angeles." The casual recitation of Martinez's personal information was more terrifying than any threat. This wasn't random violence, it was systematic, researched, planned. "Let me go," I said. "Take me to Iris and we'll talk. But let Martinez out of this." "Oh, Ranger Martinez is already part of this. Has been since the moment he started up that trail. You see, I don't just hunt individuals. I hunt systems. And you park rangers with your protocols and procedures and predictable responses. You're a very interesting system to examine." He pulled something from his pocket, a military-grade radio, much more sophisticated than our Park Service equipment. "Unit 1, this is Control. Target 2 is approaching the primary site. Initialize Phase 2. A voice responded immediately. "Copy, Control, Target 2 acquired." My blood turned to ice. There were more of them. "How many?" I asked. "Does it matter? You're thinking tactically now, Ranger. Good. Your training is finally overriding your social conditioning, but you're still thinking too small. This isn't about numbers. It's about knowledge. I know everything about your procedures, your backup protocols, your emergency responses. I know that Martinez will establish a perimeter around the Caldwell site. I know he'll attempt radio contact every 10 minutes. I know that when he can't raise you, he'll call for additional units." He was right. and that realization was more frightening than anything he'd said yet. We weren't dealing with a random psychopath. This was someone who'd studied us, learned our patterns, turned our own procedures into weapons against us. "What do you want?" I asked. "Evolution, Ranger. Adaptation. For too long, your species has lived without meaningful predation. You've grown soft, predictable, easy. I'm simply reintroducing natural selection pressure. The smart ones, the truly adaptive ones, survive. The rest," he shrugged, "you're insane. I'm selective, Darwin in action, and you, Ranger Blackwood, are tonight's examination." My radio crackled again. "Blackwood, respond immediately. I've got an empty campsite here and blood on the ground." Blood. Christ, what had they done to Iris? "She's alive," the man said, reading my expression. "For now. But her continued survival depends on your performance in the coming hours. Think of it as a field test. Your training and instincts against my knowledge and preparation. Winner takes all." "This isn't a game." "Everything is a game, Ranger. The only question is whether you understand the rules." He stepped backward into the darkness, and despite my flashlight beam, seemed to simply melt away. "Oh, and Ranger? Your light makes you visible for miles. In this environment, visibility equals vulnerability. First lesson free." I clicked off the flashlight immediately, plunging myself into near-complete darkness, but it was too late. I'd been broadcasting my position for the past 20 minutes like a beacon. My radio crackled. "Blackwood, I'm heading toward your last known position. Give me something, anything." I keyed the mic, whispering, "Martinez, get out. Now. It's a trap. Multiple hostiles, military training. Request immediate backup from County Sheriff, FBI if possible." Static. "Martinez, do you copy?" Nothing. I was alone in the Olympic wilderness with at least 2 trained killers who knew the terrain better than I did, had better equipment, and had been planning this for God knew how long. Everything I'd been taught about wilderness survival suddenly seemed inadequate. But I wasn't just fighting for my own life. Iris was still out there, and if this man was telling the truth, she was being kept alive as leverage. David Kim, Sarah Rodriguez, the others. Maybe they were alive too, somewhere in this vast wilderness, waiting for rescue that never came. I had to move. Staying still meant death, but movement meant exposure. I tried to remember everything I'd learned about military evasion tactics, guerrilla warfare, survival in hostile territory. The problem was, I'd learned it in classrooms and training scenarios, not in real situations where failure meant death. The man hunting me had clearly learned it differently. I started moving, using the faint starlight filtering through the canopy to navigate. Without the flashlight, my night vision began to adapt, and I could make out basic shapes, trees, rocks, fallen logs. It wasn't much, but it was better than being a walking target. My goal was to reach the main trail system, where hopefully I could intercept other park personnel or at least find better communication, but every step felt like walking through a minefield. Any sound could give away my position. Any movement might trigger whatever surveillance system they'd established. After 20 minutes of careful movement, I found a game trail heading downhill toward the river. Animal paths were often the safest routes in dense forest. They avoided the worst obstacles and generally led to water or clearings, but they were also predictable, which made them potential ambush sites. I was weighing the risks when I heard Martinez scream. It wasn't a shout of surprise or a call for help. It was pure agony, the sound of someone in unimaginable pain, and it was coming from the direction of Iris's campsite. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run toward that sound, to help my colleague, to follow my training and my oath as a ranger. But I could also hear the man's voice in my head. Predictable. This was what he wanted. He was using Martinez as bait, the same way he'd used Iris's voice to lure me into the open. And I was walking right into it. But what choice did I have? Martinez was my partner, my responsibility. If I abandoned him, I was no better than the thing hunting us. I started toward the screaming, moving as quietly as possible, trying to approach from an unexpected angle. The sound was coming from a clearing I knew well, a flat area beside the river where researchers often established their base camps. Open ground, no cover, perfect killing field for anyone with military training. The screaming stopped abruptly. I froze, listening for any sound that might indicate what had happened. Silence again, that unnatural quiet that seemed to follow in the wake of violence. Then I heard voices, low and conversational, too distant to make out words but close enough to indicate multiple people. At least two, maybe more. They were discussing something with the casual tone of professionals completing a job. I crept closer, using a fallen log for cover, until I could see into the clearing. Martinez was there, but not in any condition to be helped. They'd tied him to a tree at the edge of the clearing, and even in the darkness I could see that they'd done things to him. Terrible things. He was still breathing, but barely, and the shallow rise and fall of his chest told me he wouldn't last long. But he was conscious. His head turned slightly, scanning the forest edge, looking for help that we both knew wasn't coming. Two figures moved around the clearing with practiced efficiency. One was the man I'd encountered earlier, now wearing night vision goggles that made him look like some kind of technological demon. The other was smaller, female, but moving with the same predatory grace. They were setting up something in the center of the clearing, lights maybe or sensors, creating a kill zone. Target 1 is mobile, the woman said quietly. Infrared signature heading this direction, estimated arrival 12 minutes. Good, the man replied. Martinez performed exactly as expected. Pain response, duration, volume, all within acceptable parameters. Should draw our ranger right into the optimal engagement zone. They were using Martinez's torture as a lure. And God help me, it was working. Every fiber of my being wanted to charge into that clearing, to put bullets in both of them and get Martinez to medical attention. But that's exactly what they expected. I had to think differently, fight differently. What did I know about them? They had night vision, sophisticated communications, military training. They knew the park's layout and our procedures. They'd been planning this for months, maybe years. But they were overconfident. The man had revealed too much information, showed off too much. Classic predator behavior. They enjoyed the intellectual dominance as much as the physical hunt. And overconfidence could be exploited. They expected me to come straight at them, driven by emotion and training. What if I didn't? I started moving away from the clearing, back toward the cache I'd discovered. If they'd prepared one hidden site, there might be others, and those sites might contain information about their overall plan, their base of operations, or most importantly, where they were keeping Iris and possibly other prisoners. It took me 40 minutes to navigate back through the darkness, and by then I was starting to hear search activity in the distance. Helicopter rotors, the sound of multiple vehicles on the main access road. Chief Voss had finally realized something was seriously wrong and called in reinforcements. But more personnel also meant more targets for whatever game these people were playing. The cache site looked different in the darkness, more ominous, like the entrance to some ancient burial mound. But I needed information, and this was the only source I'd found. I clicked on my flashlight for just a moment, shielding the beam with my hand, and went through the hidden supplies more systematically. The maps were the key, detailed topographical charts of the Olympic Peninsula, with locations marked in some kind of code. Numbers and letters that didn't correspond to any marking system I recognized. But one location was marked differently. A red circle around a spot deep in the park's interior, at least 10 miles from the nearest trail. If I was reading the map correctly, it was near the headwaters of the Bogachil River, in an area so remote that few people ever visited it. Perfect place to keep prisoners. I was studying the map when I heard it, the soft whisper of fabric against vegetation. Someone approaching the cache site. I killed the light immediately and pressed myself against the back wall of the shelter, trying to become invisible. Footsteps, careful and measured, stopped just outside. "I know you're in there, Ranger." The woman's voice, closer than I'd expected. Very resourceful coming back here. Most people would have gone straight for their dying colleague. But you're thinking tactically now. Good. Makes this more interesting. I didn't respond, didn't move, barely breathed. "We have motion sensors throughout this area," she continued conversationally. "Thermal imaging, audio pickups. We've been tracking you since you left the clearing. The question isn't whether we know where you are, it's whether you're smart enough to survive what comes next. A small object rolled into the shelter, bouncing off the rock walls. In the darkness, I couldn't see what it was, but I could hear it. Electronic beeping, getting faster. Grenade. I lunged out of the shelter just as the world exploded behind me. Not an explosive grenade, flashbang, designed to disorient rather than kill. But the concussion knocked me flat, left my ears ringing and my vision filled with dancing lights. Strong hands grabbed me before I could recover, zip-tied my wrists behind my back, hauled me to my feet. Through the ringing in my ears, I could hear the woman talking into her radio. Target 1 secured, beginning transport to primary facility. They half-carried, half-dragged me through the forest, moving with the confidence of people who knew exactly where they were going. My vision was starting to clear, but my balance was shot, and the restraints made it impossible to break free. We walked for what felt like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, deeper into the park than I'd ever been on foot. The terrain grew increasingly rough, and I began to understand why they'd chosen this location. No roads, no trails, no chance of accidental discovery by hikers or researchers. Finally, we reached their destination. It was sophisticated beyond anything I'd imagined. Built into the side of a ridge, camouflaged so expertly that it was invisible until you were right on top of it, was a compound that looked like something from a military installation. Multiple buildings, solar panels, communication arrays, and what looked like holding facilities. The woman who'd captured me pushed me toward the largest building. "Welcome to the laboratory, Ranger. This is where we conduct our research." Inside, the place was even more impressive. Banks of computer monitors showing surveillance feeds from throughout the park. Detailed charts tracking the movements of park personnel over months. Psychological profiles of individual rangers, including one with my photograph and personal information. And in the center of it all, like a trophy room, were photographs. Dozens of them. Missing persons from throughout the Pacific Northwest, not just the Olympic Peninsula. Some faces I recognized from FBI bulletins. Others were strangers, but the common thread was clear. They were all people who'd disappeared in wilderness areas over the past several years. Impressive, isn't it? The man I'd first encountered emerged from a side room, no longer wearing camouflage paint. Without the mud and charcoal obscuring his features, he looked disturbingly normal. Mid-40s, graying hair, the kind of face you'd forget in a crowd. 3 years of systematic research into predator-prey dynamics in human populations. Research? I tried to keep my voice steady. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about evolution, natural selection, the reintroduction of meaningful selection pressure into a species that's grown complacent. He gestured toward the photographs. Each of these individuals represented a failure to adapt. They followed predictable patterns, made obvious mistakes, failed to recognize the signs of predation until it was too late. And the ones who survived? His smile was cold. There are no survivors, Ranger. Only subjects who are still participating in ongoing experiments. He led me deeper into the compound, through a corridor lined with doors that looked like prison cells. From behind some of those doors came sounds, scratching, whimpering, the soft murmur of voices speaking to themselves. People who'd been here too long, people who'd broken under whatever treatment they'd received. We stopped at one door, and he opened a viewing slot. "Miss Caldwell," he said, "your rescuer has arrived." I looked through the slot and saw Iris, alive but clearly traumatized. She was sitting in the corner of a small cell, knees drawn up to her chest, rocking slightly. When she heard the man's voice, she looked up with an expression of pure terror. "She's been here for 3 days," he said casually. "Remarkable resilience, actually. Most subjects begin showing signs of psychological breakdown within the first 24 hours. But she's maintained coherent thought patterns, even attempted escape twice. Very promising." "Let her go," I said. "You've got me now. Let her go." "Oh, Ranger, you still don't understand the scope of what's happening here. This isn't about individual capture and release. This is about systematic pressure applied to an entire population. Every person who disappears, Every search that fails, every family left wondering, it all contributes to the overall selection pressure. He opened another viewing slot. Behind this door was a man I didn't recognize, older, maybe in his 50s, wearing the torn remains of hiking gear. David Kim, the man said. Disappeared 14 months ago while researching old-growth forest preservation. Brilliant man, actually. His work on forest ecosystem management was groundbreaking, but he failed to recognize that he was being hunted until it was too late. He's still alive. Define alive. Physically, yes. Psychologically. He shrugged. Mr. Kim has been helping us understand how prolonged isolation affects cognitive function. The data has been fascinating. More doors, more prisoners. Sarah Rodriguez, the park visitor who'd vanished 2 years earlier. An elderly couple from Portland who'd been listed as missing persons 6 months ago. Others I didn't recognize. People who'd probably been written off as lost to accidents or animal attacks. All alive. All broken. How many? I asked. In this facility, 18 current subjects. But this is just one location. We have similar installations throughout the Pacific Northwest, Alaska, Northern California, anywhere there's sufficient wilderness to support long-term research. The scope of what he was describing was staggering. Not a single psychopath, but an organized network conducting systematic predation across multiple states. How many people had disappeared? How many families were still waiting for answers that would never come? Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Because someone has to. Because your species has forgotten what it means to be prey. Because without meaningful selection pressure, you've grown weak, predictable, easy to exploit. We're simply providing a service, reintroducing natural balance to an ecosystem that's become dangerously unbalanced. He led me to what looked like an observation room, with monitors showing multiple cells, outdoor surveillance feeds, and what appeared to be live streams from other locations. A woman was operating the equipment, the same woman who'd captured me, I realized, but now I could see her clearly. Professional, clinical, the kind of person who might work in a research facility or government installation. Dr. Sarah Chen, the man said, introducing her. Former military psychologist, expert in behavioral modification and stress response analysis. She's been instrumental in developing our research protocols. Dr. To, Chen looked up from her monitors and smiled politely, as if we'd just been introduced at a cocktail party. Ranger Blackwood, your psychological profile suggested you'd be an interesting subject. Higher than average intelligence, strong moral compass, well-developed sense of responsibility for others. These traits make for compelling research opportunities. Research into what? Breaking points, she said simply. How much pressure can we apply to an individual before their behavioral patterns change fundamentally? At what point does survival instinct override social conditioning? When does the prey animal finally recognize that it's prey? She gestured toward the monitors. For example, Subject 12, Sarah Rodriguez, initially showed strong resistance to our conditioning protocols, maintained hope for rescue, attempted multiple escapes, refused to participate in our behavioral modification exercises. But after 8 months of systematic pressure, she's become remarkably cooperative, hasn't attempted escape in over 6 months. On one of the monitors, I could see Sarah Rodriguez sitting quietly in her cell, staring at the wall with empty eyes. Whatever person she'd been before, that person was gone. And now we get to study you, Dr. Chen continued. A trained ranger, someone who should theoretically be better equipped to handle wilderness survival scenarios. Will your training help you adapt to our environment, or will it make you more rigid, more likely to break when your established procedures prove ineffective? You're both insane, I said, but even as the words came out, I knew they were wrong. These people weren't insane. They were methodical, organized, conducting what they genuinely believed was legitimate research. That made them infinitely more dangerous than simple psychopaths. Sanity is subjective, Ranger, the man said. What we're doing here represents the logical extension of evolutionary theory. Darwin observed natural selection in isolated populations. We're simply expanding that observation to include human subjects under controlled conditions. He moved to a wall map showing the entire Pacific Northwest, marked with dozens of red pins. Each pin represents a subject acquisition over the past 5 years. Notice the pattern? Remote wilderness areas, minimal search and rescue capabilities, populations that trust authority figures like park rangers. We've created the perfect laboratory. I studied the map, trying to process the scope of what I was seeing. Dozens of disappearances across 5 states, all connected to this network of killers masquerading as researchers. The FBI must be investigating. Of course they are. Missing persons cases, unexplained disappearances, families demanding answers. But what they're looking for is a serial killer, a single perpetrator with a psychological compulsion. They're not equipped to recognize systematic research conducted by trained professionals using scientific methodology. Dr. Chen pulled up files on her computer. We've actually published papers on our findings, Ranger. Peer-reviewed studies on stress response in isolated populations, behavioral modification under extreme conditions, the breakdown of social cooperation in survival scenarios. The academic community has been quite receptive to our work. Published papers? Under pseudonyms, of course, and with carefully sanitized data. But the research is sound. We're contributing valuable knowledge to the fields of psychology, sociology, and evolutionary biology. The casual way she discussed their work, as if kidnapping and torturing people was just another research methodology, was more terrifying than any physical threat they'd made. These weren't monsters. They were professionals who'd convinced themselves that their crimes served a greater scientific purpose. "Where do I fit into your research?" I asked. "You represent a control subject," the man explained. "Someone with advanced wilderness training, extensive knowledge of the research environment, and strong psychological motivation to survive. We want to see how long it takes to break someone who should theoretically be unbreakable." "And if I don't break?" Dr. Chen smiled. "Everyone breaks, Ranger. It's simply a matter of finding the right pressure points. For some subjects, it's physical deprivation, food, water, sleep. For others, it's psychological isolation or the systematic destruction of hope. For someone like you, it might be moral pressure, forcing you to choose between your own survival and the welfare of other subjects." As if on cue, the man gestured toward the monitors showing the cells. "For example, we could present you with a choice. Your freedom in exchange for selecting which of your fellow subjects should be terminated. Or perhaps we could arrange for you to participate in our conditioning protocols for other subjects. Help us break them more efficiently in exchange for improved treatment." "I'll never help you." "Perhaps not initially. But we have time, Ranger. Months, if necessary. And we've found that even the strongest subjects eventually realize that cooperation offers the only path to reduced suffering." They were talking about psychological torture, systematic dehumanization designed to break down every moral and ethical foundation I'd built my life on. And the worst part was their confidence. They'd done this before, refined their techniques, created a system that they were certain would work. "Let me show you something," Dr. Chen said, pulling up a video file on her computer. Subject 7, acquired 18 months ago. Initial psychological evaluation showed strong moral compass, leadership qualities, resistance to authority when that authority conflicted with personal ethics. Very similar profile to yours. The video showed a man in his 30s, dressed in hiking gear, being brought into what looked like the same facility where I was now standing. He was defiant, demanding to know where he was, threatening legal action, all the responses I'd been feeling myself. "Watch," Dr. Chen said quietly. The video jumped forward, showing the same man 6 months later. His appearance had changed dramatically. Thinner, hollow-eyed, moving with the shuffling gait of someone who'd given up hope. But he was still recognizably human, still maintaining some core of personality. Another jump forward, and that core was gone. The man on screen looked like a broken puppet, responding to commands with mechanical obedience, no spark of independence or resistance left in his eyes. 12 months, Doctor, Chen said. From capture to complete psychological reconstruction. Subject 7 now assists with intake procedures for new subjects, helps maintain facility security, and participates in our research protocols without resistance. He's become quite valuable to our operation. You destroyed him. We evolved him, removed counterproductive behavioral patterns, eliminated psychological obstacles to cooperation, optimized his personality for our research environment. In many ways, he's more functional now than he was before acquisition. I looked at the monitor showing Subject 7's cell. The man was sitting quietly, reading what looked like a technical manual, completely calm and apparently content. Whatever person he'd been before, that individual no longer existed. This is what happens to everyone who comes here, the man said. Eventually. Some take longer than others, but the end result is always the same. The only variable is how much suffering occurs during the transition process. And you're offering me a choice? I'm offering you information, he corrected. You can resist, fight our protocols, maintain your current psychological structure for as long as possible. Most subjects choose this path initially. Or you can cooperate, help us understand your behavioral patterns, assist with our research in exchange for more humane treatment during your transition. It wasn't really a choice at all. It was the illusion of choice designed to make me complicit in my own destruction. Classic psychological manipulation, the kind of technique used by cults and totalitarian regimes to break down individual resistance. But knowing that didn't make it less effective, because the alternative, the systematic psychological torture they'd inflicted on their other subjects, was terrifying beyond imagination. I need time to think, I said. Of course. Dr. Chen will show you to your accommodations. We'll begin the preliminary evaluation process tomorrow. They led me to a cell similar to the ones I'd seen on the monitors. Small, clean, equipped with basic amenities but clearly designed to prevent escape. The door was heavy steel with electronic locks, the walls were reinforced concrete, and the single window was barred and positioned too high to reach. Rest well, Ranger, Dr. Chen said as she sealed me inside. Tomorrow we begin learning who you really are. Alone in the cell, I tried to process everything I'd seen and heard. This wasn't just about me. It was about Iris, Martinez, all the other subjects still alive in this facility, and the network of similar operations across the region. Even if I could somehow escape, how many other people would continue to disappear into this system? But escape seemed impossible. The facility was miles from any road or trail, surrounded by wilderness that the operators knew better than anyone. They had sophisticated security systems, military training, and years of experience keeping people prisoner. Unless, I started thinking about what they'd told me, looking for weaknesses in their system. They were confident, maybe overconfident. They'd been operating for years without significant interference, which might have made them complacent. And they were researchers, not soldiers. Their primary focus was on psychological manipulation, not physical security. Most importantly, they wanted me to cooperate. That gave me leverage, however small. I spent the night planning, trying to remember everything I'd learned about escape and evasion, prison psychology, and hostage negotiation. By morning, I had the outline of a plan. It was desperate, with a low probability of success, but it was better than passive submission. When Dr. Chen arrived the next morning with breakfast and what she called the initial evaluation protocol, I was ready. I've been thinking about what you said, I told her. About cooperation. She smiled, clearly pleased. Good. Most subjects begin to see reason once they've had time to consider their situation. What specifically would you like to know? Your research methodology. How do you select subjects? What are you trying to prove? If I'm going to participate in this, I want to understand the scientific basis. It was exactly what she wanted to hear. Intellectual curiosity, willingness to engage with their work as legitimate research rather than criminal activity. Over the next several hours, she explained their operation in detail, proud of their systematic approach and eager to share their findings with someone who could appreciate the sophistication of their methods. And I listened, asked questions, took mental notes of everything that might be useful for escape or rescue. Facility layout, personnel schedules, security procedures, communication systems, information I could use if I ever got the chance. But more importantly, I learned about their weaknesses. They were obsessed with their research, convinced that they were conducting legitimate scientific work. That obsession made them vulnerable to flattery, eager to explain and justify their methods to someone who showed genuine interest. They were also isolated, cut off from normal human contact, except for their subjects and each other. That isolation had created a kind of psychological bubble where their twisted worldview seemed normal and rational. And they were proud. Proud of their intelligence, their planning, their success in evading law enforcement. That pride could be manipulated, used to make them overconfident and careless. Over the next several days, I played the role of fascinated subject, someone gradually coming to appreciate the elegance of their research design. I asked detailed questions about their methodology, praised their innovative approach to behavioral modification, even suggested improvements to their data collection procedures. And slowly, carefully, I gathered the information I needed. The facility had 18 current subjects but only 4 full-time staff members. During night shifts, only 2 people were on duty. The main communications array was located in the observation room where I'd first met Dr. Chen. The facility's power came from solar panels and a backup generator located in a separate building. Most importantly, I learned that they were planning to expand their operation. A new facility was under construction in Alaska, and they needed experienced subjects to help train personnel for the new site. Several of their long-term prisoners, including Subject 7, were scheduled for transfer within the week. That transfer represented an opportunity. Moving prisoners meant transportation, temporary vulnerability, a chance for disruption if I could coordinate the timing correctly. But I needed help, and that meant convincing other subjects to risk everything for a plan that might not work. The opportunity came during what Dr. Chen called a group conditioning session. Once a week, they brought several subjects together in a common room, supposedly to study group dynamics under stress, but actually to prevent the complete psychological isolation that might lead to catatonic breakdown. It was during one of these sessions that I was able to make contact with Iris. She was still alive, still fighting, though I could see the strain of captivity in her eyes. When she saw me, her face showed a flash of hope before she managed to control her expression. "The new guy," she said quietly during a moment when our captors were distracted. "How long have you been here?" "5 days. You?" "2 weeks. They do things to people here. Terrible things. But some of us are still fighting." Over the course of that session, I was able to identify which subjects might be capable of helping with an escape attempt. Iris, obviously. A man named Robert Chen, no relation to Dr. Chen, who'd been captured 4 months earlier but still showed signs of resistance. A woman called Maria Santos, who'd maintained enough psychological strength to help organize small acts of defiance among the other prisoners. But I also saw subjects like Sarah Rodriguez, broken beyond any possibility of recovery, and others who'd been turned into cooperative extensions of their captor's will. Any escape plan would have to account for the possibility that some subjects might actively work against it. The plan I eventually settled on was simple, desperate, and probably suicidal, but it was better than slow psychological destruction. On the night of the scheduled transfer, when security would be at its lightest and personnel would be focused on preparing prisoners for transport, I would create a distraction in my cell, a fake medical emergency that would require immediate attention. While the guards were dealing with that, Iris and the other reliable subjects would attempt to overwhelm whoever was left in the observation room and use the communications equipment to signal for help. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had. The night came sooner than expected. Dr. Chen informed me that I'd been selected for transfer to the Alaska facility, along with 3 other subjects. We'd be leaving at dawn, which meant that night was our only chance. I waited until what felt like the deepest part of the night, then began the performance of my life. Screaming about chest pains, claiming I couldn't breathe, throwing myself against the walls hard enough to create realistic sounds of distress. It worked. 2 guards came running, unlocked my cell, and found me apparently unconscious on the floor. While they were checking my pulse and debating whether to call Dr. Chen, I came alive. I'd been a wrestler in college, and while that was years ago, muscle memory kicked in. The first guard went down hard, his head hitting the concrete floor with a sound that made my stomach turn. The second guard was reaching for his radio when I got an arm around his throat. "Don't," I whispered. "Don't make me kill you too." He went limp in my arms, unconscious, not dead, but he'd be out for a while. I grabbed their keys and radios and started moving toward the other cells, Iris first, then Robert Chen, then Maria Santos. Each of them looked at me with the kind of desperate hope that breaks your heart. "Is this real?" Iris whispered. "It's real, but we need to move fast." We made it to the observation room before the alarm sounded. Maria Santos proved to be remarkably capable with the communications equipment. Apparently, she'd been an emergency dispatcher before her capture, and within minutes, she had raised someone on the emergency frequency. "This is Maria Santos, kidnapped from Olympic National Park 2 years ago. We're being held at coordinates." She read off the location from the facility's own maps. "Multiple prisoners, armed captors, request immediate assistance." The response came back immediately. "Say again your location and status." But we were out of time. The facility's alarm system was screaming, and I could hear boots running in the corridors. "Doctor," Chen's voice echoed through the building's intercom system. "All subjects return to your cells immediately. Security Protocol 7 is now in effect." "Go," I told the others. "Take the back exit, head for the river. Follow it downstream until you find help." "What about you?" Iris asked. "Someone needs to buy you time." I handed her one of the guards' radios. "Keep transmitting your location. Don't stop until you see rescue helicopters." She grabbed my arm. "Thane, don't do this. Come with us. If we all run together, they'll catch all of us. This way, some of us might make it." I pushed her toward the exit, and after a moment of agonized hesitation, she went. Robert and Maria followed, disappearing into the darkness of the Olympic wilderness. I stayed in the observation room, using the communications equipment to transmit coordinates and prisoner information to anyone who would listen. FBI, Coast Guard, County Sheriff, Park Service. I broadcasted on every frequency I could find, repeating the location over and over until I heard the sound I'd been hoping for. Helicopters, multiple aircraft, coming fast from the direction of the main park facilities. Someone had taken our distress calls seriously, and the cavalry was finally coming. But Dr. Chen and her people weren't finished yet. The man who'd first captured me, I still didn't know his real name, appeared in the doorway holding a military-style rifle. He looked calm, almost resigned, like someone who'd always known this moment would come. "Hello, Ranger," he said conversationally. "Quite an impressive performance. Better than we expected, actually. You'll make an excellent case study." "It's over," I told him. "The FBI knows about this place. Your research subjects are free. Some of them, perhaps, but not all, and certainly not the most valuable ones." He gestured toward the monitors, which still showed several occupied cells. "Subject 7, for example. He won't leave even if you open his door. We've made sure of that." "You're finished." "We're adaptable. This facility was always meant to be temporary. We have others, and we've learned valuable lessons here about security protocols and subject management. In many ways, this represents a successful completion of our research phase." The helicopters were getting closer, and I could see searchlights sweeping across the forest outside. But the man showed no signs of panic or urgency. The beautiful thing about the wilderness, Ranger, is how easy it is to disappear. How many people do you think are still missing in the Olympic Peninsula? How many families never got answers? Even after tonight, even after your dramatic rescue, how will anyone prove what happened here? He was right, and we both knew it. Physical evidence could be destroyed. Personnel could vanish into the vast wilderness they knew so well, and without the cooperation of subjects who'd been systematically broken, proving the scope of their crimes would be nearly impossible. "Dr. Chen is already implementing our evacuation protocols," he continued. "Critical personnel will be relocated to our other facilities. Essential research data will be preserved. The subjects who are too valuable to lose will be transferred before your rescuers can process this site. And you? I'll be studying your rescue operation, Ranger. How long it takes them to secure the facility, what protocols they follow, how they process evidence and interview subjects. All valuable data for improving our security measures at other locations. The sound of boots in the corridor told me that my time was running out, but not in the way I'd expected. "Doctor, Chen sends her regards," the man said, raising his rifle. "She's particularly interested in studying the psychological impact of near rescue on subject behavior. The hope followed by renewed captivity tends to accelerate the breakdown process significantly." I dove behind the console as he fired, the rifle shot deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. Electronics exploded around me, sparks and plastic fragments filling the air, but the shot had also given away his position to whoever was approaching the facility. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." The voices came from multiple directions, professional and controlled. The man cursed and moved toward a back exit, but more voices cut him off. "Building is surrounded. Come out with your hands visible." I stayed behind the console until I heard the distinctive sound of someone being forcibly restrained, then slowly stood up. FBI agents in tactical gear were flooding the facility, securing rooms and checking cells with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. "Ranger Blackwood?" One of the agents approached me, weapon lowered but ready. "I'm Agent Sarah Morrison, FBI. Are you injured?" "I'm okay, but there are other prisoners, other facilities. This is just one part of something much bigger." Over the next several hours, as dawn broke over the Olympic Peninsula, I told them everything I'd learned. The network of facilities, the systematic kidnapping and torture, the research methodology that had turned human suffering into data points. Some of it they believed immediately. Other parts required evidence that we might never find. They rescued 6 more subjects from the facility, including Subject 7, though his condition was so deteriorated that meaningful recovery seemed unlikely. Dr. Chen and 2 other staff members had vanished during the raid, along with computer equipment that probably contained years of research data. The man who'd captured me, his real name was Dr. Marcus Webb, former Army psychologist with special operations experience, was taken into custody, but he never provided useful information about the other facilities or his associates' whereabouts. Iris, Robert, and Maria were found 12 hours later, exhausted and traumatized but alive, by a search team following the Sol Duke River downstream. Martinez was airlifted to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, where he survived but never fully recovered from what they'd done to him. And me? I testified before grand juries, helped FBI profilers understand the methodology these people had used, spent months working with federal prosecutors to build cases that mostly fell apart due to lack of evidence. But I never went back to work as a ranger. The Olympic Peninsula, the place I'd loved more than anywhere else on Earth, had become a source of terror for me. Every shadow between the trees might hide a watcher. Every hiker who'd gone missing might be suffering in some hidden facility I couldn't find. Every day I spent in that forest felt like a betrayal of the people we hadn't been able to save. So I moved to New Mexico, took a job with the State Park Service here in the high desert where you can see for miles in every direction, and nothing stays hidden for long. My wife thinks I should forget what happened, put it behind me, and move on with my life. But some things don't leave your head, no matter how much you try, because I know they're still out there. Dr. Chen, the network of facilities, the systematic predation that continues in wilderness areas across the country. The FBI task force that was established after the Olympic raid has made arrests, shut down operations, rescued subjects from facilities in Alaska and Northern California, but they've never found them all. Sometimes, late at night, I still monitor the emergency frequencies, listening for distress calls that might indicate someone else has stumbled into their research. And sometimes, when the news reports another unexplained disappearance in a national park, I wonder if we're looking at natural causes or something much worse. The official investigation concluded that Dr. Webb's network was responsible for at least 47 disappearances across 5 states over a 7-year period. 18 subjects were recovered alive, though most required extensive psychological treatment and some never fully recovered their pre-capture personalities. The rest are still listed as missing persons. Dr. Chen and 3 other primary operatives remain at large, despite an ongoing federal manhunt. The FBI believes they've established new operations in other regions, possibly international, but concrete evidence has been difficult to obtain, and every few months I get a call from Agent Morrison or one of her colleagues asking if I'd consider consulting on a new case. Another disappearance with unusual characteristics. Another situation where standard search and rescue protocols have failed to locate the missing person. I always say no, because I learned something in that facility that I wish I could forget. The most dangerous predators in any wilderness aren't the ones with claws and fangs. They're the ones with intelligence, planning, and the absolute conviction that what they're doing serves a greater purpose. They're still out there, in forests and mountains and desert areas where people go to find peace and instead find something that's been studying them, learning their patterns, waiting for the right moment to add them to their research. So when people ask me why I left Washington, why I moved to a place where the landscape is harsh and unforgiving but honest, I tell them it's for my health. The dry air is better for my lungs. The altitude helps with some old injuries. The pace of life suits me better. I don't tell them about the nightmares or the way my hands shake when I see dense forest on television, or how I can't sleep in complete darkness anymore because that's when I hear the sounds again. The sound of footsteps that might be following me. The sound of radio static that might be carrying voices. The sound of someone screaming for help in the darkness, and never knowing if it's real or just another trap. 3 a.m. It's always 3 a.m. when I wake up. And for just a moment I'm back in that facility, back in that cell, back in the observation room watching monitors that show people who've been broken and rebuilt into something else entirely. But then I remember where I am. New Mexico. Desert. Open sky. 1,000 miles from the Olympic Peninsula and the things that might still be hunting in those ancient forests. And I tell myself that's enough distance, that I'm safe, that they'll never find me here. But deep down in the part of my mind that still hears those sounds in the darkness, I know I'm wrong. Because people like Dr. Chen and Dr. Webb don't just stop. They adapt. They learn. They find new hunting grounds and new research subjects and new ways to study the breaking point of human resilience. And sometimes when the wind blows across the desert in the early morning hours, carrying scents and sounds from places far away, I wonder if they're still studying me, still watching, still waiting, still conducting their research into what it takes to turn a human being into something else entirely. The investigation continues. If you have information about disappearances in wilderness areas, particularly cases involving experienced hikers or researchers who vanished without explanation, please contact the FBI. There are people still out there who need help. People who are still waiting for rescue. People who might not have much time left. And for anyone planning to spend time alone in remote wilderness areas, remember this. The greatest danger doesn't always come from wild animals or natural hazards. Sometimes it comes from other human beings who've convinced themselves that your suffering serves a greater purpose. Stay alert. Stay together. And if something feels wrong, if you have that primitive sense that you're being watched or followed, trust that instinct. It might be the only thing that saves you from becoming someone else's research subject. End of testimony.